Hey everybody, I'm Juliana and you're watching Sprocket Girl. Today we're going to go back to the basics and learn how to take the wheels off a mountain bike and put them back on. In some of my previous episodes I talked about bike maintenance and how to clean your bike, and I ran you through all those steps, but I realized I didn't really talk about how to take off the wheel and to put it back on without damaging the bike, and how to do it in an efficient and quick way. So that's what we're going to do today on the example of my Stumpjumper here behind me. Let's get to it. Alright, so we're going to start with the front wheel because that's easier than the back one. Obviously you don't have the chain, you don't have the derailleur, and you don't have like the chain ring or the cassette to deal with. So one thing that you can do is, if you don't have a bike stand like I do, you can turn your bike upside down and put it on its seat and handlebars, and that'll be an easier way for you to balance the bike and take the wheel off. In my case, I have the bike suspended by the bike stand, and that makes it a lot easier. Alright, so let's take the front wheel off. In my case here, I have a quick release with a through axle, so this is pretty easy. All you have to do is undo the quick release, so here I'm pulling it towards me, and then rotating this counterclockwise. I'm also holding on to the wheel at the same time. Unscrewing it and then slowly pulling out the through axle while I'm holding the wheel. Sometimes you have to kind of jimmy it back and forth. There we go. And then slowly lower the wheel out from between the brake pads. So I'm going to put this aside for a moment. So maybe you have a bike rack on your car that requires you to regularly take off your front wheel, and so you're probably very familiar with this. One thing I can recommend for people who are not too familiar with it is to take the through axle and just thread it back in where it came from. This way you keep it with the bike, it doesn't get lost, it's not rolling around in the dust and dirt, and you don't get the threads dirty. So let's just do that. I'll just put it back in here. And I'll just screw that back in, and there it's tucked away safe and sound until you want to put your front wheel back on. So if your bike happens to have rim brakes or caliper brakes, one thing you'll need to do before you actually take the wheel off is to release the tension on the brake cables, and that's pretty easily done. Unfortunately I can't demonstrate it here because I actually have hydraulic disc brakes, so that doesn't apply to me here. So if you happen to have hydraulic disc brakes as well, then one thing you want to avoid doing is pulling on the brake levers while the wheel is removed. So normally when the wheel is mounted, you have the disc in between the brake pads, which will avoid them touching each other. But if the wheel is removed and you pull the brake levers, then the disc or the brake pads will move closer together, and it's really hard to get them back to their original position and then get the disc back in between the brake pads. So some people I've heard, if they accidentally pull the levers, they will use like a very narrow screwdriver or, for instance, a credit card to jimmy in between the brake pads and to get them to move apart again. But there is actually a designated tool for this, a brake pad separation tool. And I think Park Tools has one of these. And so if this happens to you and you accidentally do pull the brake levers, then I would recommend getting the proper tool to separate your brake pads again, so to avoid scratching them or in some other way damaging the brake pads. Alright, so let's put this back on. It's pretty easy. We just remove the through axle again here. And then I'll slide the wheel in here, and we want to get the disc right between the pads. There we go. Sometimes you need to like shimmy it a little bit into place. There. There we go. And let's screw it back on. So one thing that you might want to avoid is to have this quick release lever sticking out too far away from the fork. So if it sticks down here or over here, it might get caught on something. In this case, I could get it a little bit closer to the fork, so let's do that. So I'll release it and back it off a little bit, and then tighten it again. And you can see that it really wouldn't necessarily get caught on anything this way. So that's just one little maintenance thing that you can do at the end. All right, let's move on to the back wheel. So one thing that you want to do to prepare for taking the back wheel off is to release as much tension from the chain as you can, which means to have it at the lowest setting or on the smallest cog of the cassette. And if you happen to have more than one chain ring, you'll also want it on the smallest setting there. I actually only have one chain ring, so that doesn't affect me in this case. But I am going to shift down so that the chain is on the smallest cog here, and we have the least amount of tension on the chain. So let's do that. I forgot which direction. All right. So another thing that you can do to release tension, and on my bike this is a really great feature, is that if you push down here on this part of the derailleur, you can see there's a small opening here, and I have this lock button right here. You can see there's a little symbol of a lock right there, and if I push this into that opening, it locks this part in place, and you can see there's a huge amount of slack in the chain, so that'll make it really easy to remove. So if you don't happen to have this handy feature of the lock that I just described, you can also just push down on this lever here after you've removed the through axle and while you're trying to take the wheel out. That works just fine as well. In my case, I just don't have to use an extra hand to release the tension on the cable because I have this nice lock.
Yeah, I mean the light's way better that way.
Yeah. In my case, I don't have a quick release in the back, but I have to unscrew the through axle using an Allen wrench. In my case, it's a 6mm Allen wrench. So basically it's the same thing. You just unscrew the through axle in a counterclockwise fashion while holding on to the wheel. So let's do that. So I'm pulling it out at the same time, also pulling up on the wheel so it doesn't just fall down. So holding on to this. And what I want to do is, with my right hand, is to release the chain from the lowest cog here. Which is pretty easy, you just slip it off like that. There you go. And then I just let the chain kind of hang right here over these small cogs. And there you have it. So to put the rear wheel back on, we want to balance getting the disc back between the brakes with getting the chain back on the smallest cog. So an easy way to do this is to lift the wheel so that the smallest cog is a little bit higher than this small cog here, and then we can pretty easily just lift the chain onto the smallest cog here. We need to like thread it onto the little teeth. There we go. And then from there, I'll just lift the wheel higher so that the disc lands right between the disc brakes. And at the same time, I also need to position it so that the through axle can go through it nicely. There we go. Thanks, Graham. Again, this requires a little bit of shimmying, but I got it pretty quickly. And there we have it. Just screw this back in. Tighten it. Take this guy out. Then I'm going to release this little lock here by just moving this forward, and it pops right back out. There we go. So one thing I want to do is just to make sure that everything is working really well. So I'll shift through all the gears and make sure that the gears are shifting really smoothly. So let's do that real quick. Perfect, seems to be running smoothly. Alright everybody, now you know how to take off the front wheel and the rear wheel on your mountain bike and to put them back on, and to do so without damaging your brake pads or bike in any way. And if you like Sprocket Girl, the channel, or like any of the videos, consider hitting the like button or subscribing to the channel. And also, feel free to leave me a comment. I'm happy to hear from you guys. Alright, thanks so much for watching. Bye!